What you're going to see in the coming weeks will be political and military escalation on all sides. Both sides, Ukraine and Russia, will try to put themselves in the strongest position ahead of the moment when Trump will be inaugurated and will try to settle this war.
Do you see Ukraine in a tighter spot today than ever in the past 3 years?
We survived the first presidency of Donald Trump, and we will equally survive his second presidency. I see history repeating itself. We are hearing again statements, comments, leaks that Trump is going to make a deal with Putin at the expense of Ukraine, and he will send Ukraine down the drain. Putin speaks about his willingness to negotiate, and within less than 24 hours, he throws a barrage of ballistic missiles on Kiev. And this will be the main difficulty Trump will be facing: how to convince Putin, how to persuade him to behave in a meaningfully constructive way.
Do you see Trump arming Ukraine to defend itself from Russia in the same vein as the Biden administration did?
If Trump comes to a conclusion that Putin is the source of his problem, then he's likely to send even more weapons to Ukraine than the Biden administration did.
Hi, you're watching The Times of India. I'm Aditi Prasad, and joining me today is Dmytro Kuleba, Ukraine's top diplomat and former foreign minister, of course. He joins us from Kiev.
I'm giving an interview to you, and it's a clear message from us to Russia: whatever you do, whatever you try, you are not going to kill us.
But it's not just about the missile attacks. The attacks have also cut heating to hundreds of buildings, apparently, in this cold temperatures that you guys are experiencing. I'm sorry. But Ukraine seems to be destined for a third tough winter. How long can you people sustain this?
We will sustain this. We are already in winter. December is almost over. We had 2 very difficult weeks after the previous large-scale attack of Russia on our energy infrastructure. And I wanted to make clear, you see, Russia knows what it is doing. It deliberately targets energy infrastructure that provides electricity and heating to civilian population of Ukraine, with the purpose of depriving Ukrainians of light and heat in the middle of winter. So this is an act directed against civilian population of the whole country, of a multi-million country. So, but our energy infrastructure is coping with these challenges, although it's a huge hardship. It's very difficult, but Ukrainians will continue to endure because, as I said, we have to. The stakes are too high. We cannot allow Putin to prevail over us and to demonstrate that his blunt force is stronger than our spirit.
You say you cannot allow Putin to prevail over you. The Russian side says that the attacks are a response to a strike using Western missiles on a chemical plant in Russia earlier this week. How do you, where do you draw the line? Because at the end of the day, it's a tit for tat, and people are dying senselessly.
The most popular Russian narrative that everything they do in response, that they are the victim who has to defend itself. Even the invasion in Ukraine is portrayed by them as a response. So all this is, of course, a lie. Russia was not provoked to launch this invasion. The moment this invasion has begun, we are in a state of war. and both sides have to act within international law to in times of war. But the difference is that Russia is the aggressor and Ukraine is exercising its right to self-defense, which is fundamental here, because we should avoid a narrative that puts Ukraine and Russia on equal footing, as if we were the same in this war. No, we are not. We are defending ourselves, and Russia is trying to kill us. So when Russia tries to kill us,
As far as Putin is concerned, it's the other way around. Doesn't even have a beef with the Ukrainians, he says that the Ukrainians and the Russians are the same people. It's the US who's playing a double game here, installing a quote unquote puppet regime in Kiev, and therefore using that to sort of align NATO forces closer to the Russian border. What's your response to that?
well, the United Kingdom is not attacking the United States, arguing that they are the same people. India
Hmm.
is not attacking Bangladesh, arguing that you are the same people. I
Right.
mean, if we resort to this kind of arguments, then the world will look completely different. Uh, Second, if we are the same people as he claims, why did his soldiers commit acts of genocide in Bucha, in Mariupol, in Izum, in the Kharkiv region, and massacred civilian population? Is this the way you treat people when you believe that they are one of you? Probably not. So we should clearly differentiate what Putin says and what he and his army does. They raise cities to the ground, they commit massacres, and they deliberately attack energy infrastructure to leave people freezing and without access to electricity in the middle of winter. These are all deliberate actions. And even if I am to theoretically accept the logic that he's doing something in response,
Hmm.
attack on a factory and attack on the electricity generating facility, these are disproportionate attacks, because when you attack a factory, you destroy machinery. When
Hmm.
you attack an energy facility, you put at risk life of hundreds of thousands of people who can freeze in winter.
Let's address the ending of this conflict, which the new U.S. president-elect Donald Trump has, he's made it his priority number one. He's talked about it through his campaigns, and he continues to talk about it today. The situation in Europe being a little wobbly right now. We know Germany is in a disarray, so is France, several other nations also talking about potentially pulling back aid. Now, most importantly, of course, there is the US, there is Donald Trump. Do you see Ukraine in a tighter spot today than ever in the past 3 years?
We survived the first presidency of Donald Trump, and we will equally survive his second presidency. Of course, the scale of the war is uncomparable in terms of his first presidency and the second one. But Ukraine was also weaker back then. And I see history repeating itself. We are hearing again statements, comments, leaks that Trump is going to make a deal with Putin at the expense of Ukraine, and he will send Ukraine down the drain. We heard all of this before during his first tenure as president. We're hearing it again, but it was impossible to do it last time. It is impossible to do it now. Not, and it doesn't depend whether Trump genuinely wants or doesn't want to do it. I mean, making a deal at the expense of Ukraine. What it depends on the complexity of factors in international politics and Russia's conviction that they should not agree today to any compromises because, as you suggested, they believe that eventually the West will falter and will not be able to support Ukraine to the extent that will allow us to stop Putin. So his basic question is, why should I agree to a part of price today if I can get the whole price tomorrow? And this will be the main difficulty Trump will be facing, how to convince Putin, how to persuade him to behave in a meaningfully constructive way. Remember my word, what you're going to see in the coming weeks will be political and military escalation on all sides. I predicted it like a month ago, and it has already been taking place. Because both sides, Ukraine and Russia, will try to put themselves in the strongest position ahead of the moment when Trump will be inaugurated and will try to settle this war. But it's much more complicated than he or anyone in his circle believes.
But Trump, we all know Trump doesn't really care about global complications. He does what he wants to do. That's what his first presidency showed us. And in a recent interview or a conversation with reporters, he talked about that Ukraine should be ready to give up some land. He said Zelensky has got to make a deal. You just talked about it. Putin has got to make a deal. How would you react to that point, what he said?
In the same way as Indian government and Indian people would react if anyone would tell them to prepare to cede their territories to Pakistan or to China, because
Right.
this is what big players want. Of course, how else can you react to this? But do not underestimate the complexity of the world. I will give you just one. I already shared one element with you, the
Mm.
reluctance of Putin to engage in meaningful peace talks. But also do not forget about China. Let's ask ourselves a question, which is very simple and basic one. Why is China interested in the success of Trump's diplomacy in ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, which will become the manifestation of the strengths of the United States globally and encourage US allies in Asia who feel threatened by China? Do not forget about that. So you see my point that if the United States settle this conflict and they find ways to make Russia concede something and Ukraine concede something, then Trump will only strengthen his position vis-a-vis China.
Right.
And
And
China
China doesn't want that. And
and
China,
China doesn't want that. Exactly. So and China has leverage on Putin. So they will speak to Putin, and they will, in a way that to discourage him from entering any deal. So this kind of things may be happening. And while Trump, I agree with you, Trump likes to do what he wants to do, but the world is more complicated than just Donald Trump.
do you see Trump arming Ukraine to defend itself from Russia in the same vein as the Biden administration did if Putin refuses to come to the negotiating table?
Well, Putin speaks about his willingness to negotiate, and within less than 24 hours, he throws a barrage of ballistic missiles on Kiev.
Mm.
Is this the way you behave when you genuinely want to negotiate and to establish peace? Probably not. I mean, it happened within less than 24 hours. He gave the press conference saying that he's willing to negotiate and ready for peace. And the moment the conference was, and by the moment he was saying that, he had already given the order to prepare this night attack on Ukraine. I mean, these things are just should be obvious to everyone in the world that his words about peace are meaningless. This is not what he wants, but he plays a very important game, which is behave constructively with Donald Trump in order not to make him feel sad and make him come to a conclusion that you are the source of the problem. Because if Trump comes to a conclusion that Putin is the source of his problem, then he's likely to send even more weapons to Ukraine than the Biden administration did. So a short answer to your question, yes, there are situations, not only the one that I described, but there are scenarios under which Trump will be sending a sufficient amount of weapons to Ukraine. And I do not believe that he will entirely abandon Ukraine because he cannot afford the fall of Ukraine. The fall of Ukraine will be his Afghanistan. What Afghanistan did to the political foreign policy reputation of President Biden, the fall of Ukraine will do the same to the foreign policy reputation of President Trump. It will expose his weakness because it will happen on his shift. And the last thing on earth President Trump wants to happen is the exposure of his weakness.
When President Zelensky met Trump in Paris during the opening ceremony there recently, he did indicate, however, that he's ready to accept some sort of deal. So it may not be a fall of Ukraine as you talk about, but a deal wherein Ukraine may agree to cede some territory to Russia. It seems that Zelensky said, and these are all reports, that he would be agreeable to do that in exchange for a NATO membership. Do you think that would be the right approach for Zelensky to adopt as far as what Trump is asking for?
No, I think that President Zelensky is perfectly aware of the red lines for Ukraine in this situation. He will not be willing or able to cross them. What he's doing now is exactly the same and the only viable strategy. He is showing constructiveness towards Trump and readiness to engage with him in a meaningful conversation. This is why you hear messages coming from the Trump administration saying that, like General Keith Kellogg said recently, he has a feeling that Ukraine and Russia are ready to talk. This is all a part of diplomacy, like constructive engagement. But the moment the real conversation begins, the differences between sides, and I'm not even speaking about Ukraine and Russia, the differences here are obvious, but the differences between American and Ukrainian position will become apparent, will be apparent.
You spoke about Keith Kellogg. Keith Kellogg also said recently that Ukraine's NATO membership should be put on hold indefinitely. That's not something that President Zelensky or Ukraine would agree to, is that?
If the goal of Trump administration is to establish the ceasefire, and this is the ultimate goal they pursue in their effort, then of course they can focus on bargaining NATO membership for a ceasefire. But if their goal is to end the war and prevent the next war from happening, then the only way to guarantee that is to have Ukraine in NATO. I know that I'm aware that the current thinking in Washington is distant from this from this perception, but they will come to realizing this. Bargaining NATO for a ceasefire would be a huge foreign policy mistake. For the United States, I'm speaking from their perspective. Second, from the Ukrainian perspective, Ukraine is seeking security. And the most difficult question to answer is how to prevent the next war, how to prevent Russia from coming back to our lands if we reach peace today, peaceful solution today. And in that sense, NATO is the only viable way forward. So I presume that the discussion on NATO will be the most tense and irritating part of the dialogue between Ukraine and the United States in the coming months.
What if future US aid, or military aid, money aid, what if it's conditioned on Ukraine's negotiating with Russia?
You see, when between November 2023 and April or May 2024, the US Congress was debating the supplemental financing for Ukraine's defense. During this period, we were not receiving any meaningful assistance because discussions were underway. And we still held the lines. I mean, we lost some villages, which is bad, but it's nothing like strategically damaging. So Ukraine has the reserve to buy time. Now, the Biden administration, in its last weeks in office, is dispatching everything it can to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
European partners are dispatching their support, and Ukraine has ramped up its own production of weapons. So between end of January, when President Trump enters the Oval Office, and the moment when Ukraine will run out of military equipment and resources to run the war, there will be a very good period of time. And many things can happen in the meantime. So my point here is that there will not be a moment within next months when Trump says, I'm not going to send you any weapons if you do not agree to this. And Ukraine immediately concedes and agrees, because Ukraine will still have the resource to play with.
Putin has talked about his red lines pretty often, that this is a red line, do not cross this. The red lines were Western weapons, long-range missiles getting fired into Russia. They were fired after a nod from the Biden administration, and he, sort of responded with the Oreshnik. Do you believe that the red lines, perhaps at this stage of the war, will be respected or will not be respected come January 20th?
No, the Putin's red lines in Ukraine remind me of Obama's and Hollande's red lines in Syria, like 8 years ago. So presidents of the United States, Obama, and of France, Hollande, were regularly urging Syrian regime not to cross the red lines, otherwise they would retaliate. The Syrian regime, with the support of Iran and Russia, was crossing one red line after another, including the use of chemical weapons. And crossing these lines remained unanswered from those who had threatened that they would retaliate, from the United States and France. So Putin behaves in exactly the same way in Ukraine. He, from day one, he is drawing a red line, then it's crossed. He delivers a furious statement. He sends another barrage of missiles on Ukraine. We survive another attack, and life goes on, and the fighting continues. Now, the red lines story in this war for Putin is part of his propaganda, but there is very little he can do except firing more missiles on Ukraine, which is not seen here as a way to escalate further in response to crossing red lines, because it's happening to us anyway, almost on a daily basis.
So you're saying that it perhaps shows Putin's weakness?
Of course, Putin, listen, what happened in Syria is a clear manifestation of Putin's weakness. He is not capable of fighting on multiple fronts anymore. The bad news is that we also see that when he has to choose where to fight, he is ready to give up other places for the sake of continuing the fight against Ukraine. Second, Russia has brought North Korean soldiers. I mean, isn't it a sign of weakness for a great Russia with 100 something million population that they have to import soldiers to fight for them against Ukraine? And while the idea that Ukraine cannot fight without partners has become a conventional wisdom, there is another reality that has to be recognized. Russia cannot sustain its full war effort against Ukraine without the support of partners. And while Ukraine does not have a friend who is sending his soldiers to fight for us, no, Russia does have such a friend. So
Yes,
this
but
is
Ukraine has friends which are sending missiles to Ukraine instead.
yeah, of course. I mean, this is war is multi-layered, so you have to compensate your weaknesses with your strengths. Of course, I'm not questioning that. But the thing is that when people say Russia is so big, it's so powerful, it's invincible, look around. It is much weaker than many people argue. He is hiding his weakness behind manifestations of self-confidence.
All right. You did an interview with Financial Times recently, and this is my last question to you. The headline popped at me. You said if it continues like that, we will lose the war. What scenario were you referring to?
Headlines always make the whole story. The whole story was more complicated, and I'm sure you have read it. But I think we have to speak the truth that the strategy adopted since the beginning of the invasion, which was put pressure on Russia and provide assistance to Ukraine, is not a bad strategy per se. Its problem is that both pressure on Russia and assistance to Ukraine was implemented through adopting half measures and half decisions. You cannot build a house if instead of doing everything you need, you do only half of it. Half of bricks, half of concrete, half of glass. You cannot finish the building. It's the same in foreign policy. So those who argue this is why I argue that the current strategy is not bad per se. This strategy makes sense. But if it continues to be implemented with half measures, Putin is going to win. Of course.
Is that the message? Is that the message you're sending to Donald Trump to put the full might of the United States
He has
behind?
to avoid two mistakes. First, if he remains guided by the so-called non-escalation policy, he's going to lose. If he continues with half decisions, he's going to lose. He has his interest in this war. He needs to end it in a way that will project his strength to the whole world. But if he sticks to non-escalation and half measures, he's not going to achieve that. And Ukraine will keep fighting whatever foreign circumstances are, because it's about our life. As you would fight for your independence, for your territories, for your lives, we are doing the same.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We hope to speak to you again soon. This was very informative. Let's wait what Donald Trump goes ahead and does come January 20th. We'll see that for sure. Thank you so much.